What's up, nerds, and welcome back to That Nerdy Site. I'm Frank Bozzani, and today I'm going to be running down my favorite games of last year. It was an interesting year for games. I felt like there was a long time in between game releases I was interested in, and there weren't a ton of standout games competing for Game of the Year like there have been in prior years. But during the downtime, I was able to catch up on many of the games I had missed from 2020, like Hades, Astro's Playroom, Final Fantasy VII Remake, and Doom Eternal. Plus, I was finally able to play some older games like Control, Donut County, Night in the Woods, and more. Most notably, I became a huge fan of two legacy game franchises this year, Yakuza and Metal Gear Solid. All this being said, there's still a lot of great games that were released this year, especially some with some unique and interesting ideas. So without further ado, here are my top 10 games of the year, the ones that left the biggest impression on me. Number 10, Maquette. Maquette is a creative puzzle game that ends up being a somewhat MC Escher-esque adventure with a pretty interesting love story as well. The story is a surprisingly real take on a love story that is well written and well acted. The puzzles are brain breaking sometimes, the soundtrack is fantastic, and the game really did have me invested in pushing forward to continue the narrative. Without knowing much about the game going in, I was pleasantly surprised by all of this. But earlier this year, before playing Maquette, I had also played Superliminal, which is another puzzle game I think that handled its similar puzzle solving mechanics in a better way. And ultimately, I think that's what held this game back a little bit for me. But it was still one of the best games that I've played this year, and I recommend everybody who redeemed it on PS Plus check it out. Number 9, Far Cry 6. I'm the guy that keeps playing all the Far Cry games every time one is released, and despite this being a strong entry in the Far Cry series, I think I'm finally feeling the fatigue. The gameplay is still fantastic, and it does add some good quality of life improvements, like the ability to change your loadout in the menu at any time and holster your weapon to avoid combat. And being able to visit populated cities is a nice addition, although there isn't really much to do there most of the time. The villain played by Giancarlo Esposito might be one of the best in the series, and he's a much more present force throughout the story and a deeper character than just the typical unhinged madman that we normally get. But after playing so many games in the series, Far Cry 6 struggles to maintain the level of excitement I felt in prior games and can even feel really samey at times. Some of the new additions, like the Supremo backpack, also fail to really change the gameplay in any meaningful way, and I really miss having human companions as an option entirely. They also changed it so abilities are tied to gear that you're wearing instead of being bought through the skill tree. I like this idea in concept since it makes cosmetic items more useful and allows for different loadouts, but I definitely miss just being able to have all the abilities passively active instead of going into my inventory and having to constantly change whatever gear I was wearing in the moment. I definitely hope that in the future we get some kind of a reinvention for the Far Cry series, kind of like we've gotten for Assassin's Creed. I don't know what exactly, but something to kind of reinvent it and definitely shake it up a lot more than just kind of the same old things that we've gotten before. I think that's definitely what the series needs at this point. Number 8, Persona 5 Strikers. Persona 5 Strikers is a bizarre game. Being the sequel to Persona 5 and not the more recent Persona 5 Royale, and also being a Musou style game rather than the typical JRPG. That being said, I don't think any of these things end up holding the game back, as they really nailed the Persona 5 style, characters, and world. It can be a bit slow in the early hours since they have to catch everyone up on certain events and systems from Persona 5, but since the Phantom Thieves are already assembled as a group, it ends up being a pretty fun summer road trip across Japan pretty quick. The gameplay can be a bit hectic as they have included every single element from the Persona 5 battle system, and now it's all happening in real time rather than turn based combat. And it's really easy to get overwhelmed in a crowd of shadows and personas and then get comboed into being killed from a full health bar. The combat also gets old after a few dungeons as every component is introduced quickly in the first dungeon, and it only ever evolves by adding stronger personas with a lot more HP in later dungeons, which quickly just evolves to kind of just spamming all your powers to kind of get their health down as quickly as possible. And they have those giant, massive health bars with just kind of a ton of HP. Number 7, Marvel's Guardians of the Galaxy. After everything that happened last year with the Avengers game, I was worried about this Guardians of the Galaxy game seemingly coming in hot out of nowhere. That said, this ended up being the biggest surprise of the year for me. I really enjoyed my time adventuring through space and making telltale like decisions to flavor my own story and further my relationship with different characters on board the ship. And a real strength of the game is it being untethered from anything else, as Eidos Montreal was able to carve out its own distinctive universe while still being able to pull familiar elements from and even make references to the Guardians comics and movies. There are a ton of great Easter eggs from Marvel Comics fans that help flesh out the universe, and some collectibles are even tied to specific characters, unlocking further backstory and conversations with them. Ultimately, the writing, characters, world, and story really carried the game for me, while its biggest downfalls end up being somewhat underbaked combat and many bugs that appeared throughout my two playthroughs. Number 6, Ratchet and Clank Rift Apart. Ratchet and Clank was my favorite of the PS2 era platformers, and over the years, Insomniac Games has only really perfected everything that has made the series so great. The gameplay is just as fun and frantic as it has ever been. Constantly chasing your next weapon upgrade really never gets old, and all the weapons feel great. The graphics are incredible, from the fur effects on Ratchet and Rivet to all the crazy particle effects flying around during the frenetic combat sections. Rivet and Kit are welcome additions to the series, and hopping between Ratchet and Rivet on their journey across the universe helps keep things fresh even though both characters play basically exactly the same. Being able to open rifts to travel through different universes and having a weapon that tears open rifts pulling items from these different universes are both great additions to the series. Rift Apart is really a great showcase of what the PS5 can do, and it's honestly some of the most fun I've had in a game this year. Number 5, Genesis Noir. Genesis Noir is a really unique and interesting noir detective adventure game that spans time and space. This game puts a big emphasis on impressive visuals and creative puzzles. It also packs in an interesting narrative that is told largely through the visuals and the music from the game. That being said, this game probably has my favorite soundtrack from a game this year, and I really hope we get a vinyl pressing of it soon. One of my favorite set pieces in the game is when you are making your way around on a subway train. The game breaks into a different comic book style panel with interactive tiles to progress the story forward. There are a lot of crazier cosmic visuals and puzzles that can be found in the game, especially in its final moments, but that is one that has stuck with me since I played it. The game can be a little bit slow at the start, but it does really shine in its later chapters, which isn't too bad since the game is only about 3 to 4 hours long, depending on your puzzle solving abilities. Number 4, Emily is Away 3. I have been a huge fan of the Emily is Away series going all the way back to the first game's release in 2015. All three of the games in the series have a ton of nostalgia baked in with this unique gameplay that involves an evolving narrative based on choices that you make in text chat conversations. And being set in 2008 to 2009, this entry moves away from AIM to an early Facebook like site called FaceNook. And for me, that hit a lot closer to home, and this game took me right back to that early social network era. There's such an amazing attention to detail in every aspect of this game, from the conversations you have to people's profiles to their status updates and even the links you're sent to other websites. One of my favorites is YouTube, version of YouTube that is also accurate to the era. And receiving links I used to receive and send to people and exploring the old version of YouTube, just like I used to spend hours doing, was a huge highlight of the game for me. I love pretty much everything about this game, but it being a third entry in the series, I did feel that some parts of the story didn't hit as hard for me since I anticipated some of the elements ahead of time. Even knowing it was probably going to end in heartbreak and sadness, I was still left with those feelings at the end of the game, which I think shows how strong the narrative is and how well it conveys it. Number 3, Resident Evil Village. I don't typically play horror games, so I don't have a long history with the Resident Evil franchise. I've watched friends play a few of the games in the past, and then I finally started playing the series when it went first person with Resident Evil 7. And after enjoying that so much, I've been looking forward to Resident Evil 8 ever since, and I could say it was definitely worth the wait. I think the gothic setting was a great choice, and it's a good change up from the farmhouse setting of RE7. Castle Dimitrescu is definitely a highlight of the game. The escalation of Lady Dimitrescu and her daughters stalking you throughout her castle is really intense, and it's a really good blend of the old and new Resident Evil styles. There's even a sequence after that that might be my favorite I've ever played in a horror game. It's basically an escape room that takes everything you have away from you, and it only delves further into the insanity as you progress, becoming something more like PT than Resident Evil. Everything that is here, from the gameplay, the world, and the enemy design, and then even the clever puzzles, has kept me wanting to replay this game over and over and over again. Number 2, The Artful Escape. This is certainly the most colorful game I've played this year. The Artful Escape is more than just trippy cosmic kaleidoscope visuals. It's also a charming coming of age tale about leaving your hometown to find yourself amongst the stars. This is one story that actually benefits from being a game, and the ability to flavor your adventure with different choices that lightly impact the overall narrative really helps sell the story here. For example, going through a fairly detailed character creator helps convey the theme of redefining yourself. The game is a little lighter on gameplay, with it only having light platforming and some mild rhythm game sections, but I didn't mind this personally, and I think it makes the game and story more accessible to more people. Being able to freely play the guitar whenever and having it interact with different elements of the environment as you ran by really never got old. It should go without saying the soundtrack to this game is also fantastic. It starts out very Bob Dylan folk inspired and it transitions into a more Ziggy Stardust esque space rock. Number 1, Psychonauts 2. I've been a big fan of Double Fine for a really long time now. Having played most of their games in the past, it is so great to see them fully unchained. This is truly some of their best work ever. This game has some of the best writing this year. It doesn't beat you over the head with all of its story beats. So much is conveyed through great level design, visuals, and even the enemies you encounter within the actual levels. I love how they have added enemies based on different feelings and mental health conditions. For example, having enablers shield other enemies. Being able to use your psychic powers in combat and to traverse the world feels great. It helps keep things varied. Having different enemies be weak to certain powers encourages frequently rotating through them, which leads to some fun combat sessions, especially later in the game when you have a ton of powers and there's a ton of different enemies. But that also leads to one of the slower parts of the game, I think, where you have to constantly pause and go into the menu and switch between whatever badge you have, when probably some kind of like weapon wheel or something may have worked a little bit better there. It also has some of the most creative level design I've ever played in a game, from a psychedelic Woodstock style festival to a cooking game show to even an It's a Small World style amusement park ride complete with a gift shop. For being such a fun and funny game the whole way through, Psychonauts 2 ends up having a surprisingly deep story with themes that left me thinking long after playing. And I recommend everybody check it out. Thank you for watching. I appreciate everybody who checked out the video and made it this far through me kind of rambling through some of my favorite games from this year. I hope you like, comment, subscribe, and check out some of our other videos here on the channel.